Library Education, A2 Sociology, Unit 3, Beliefs in Society, Religion and Social Change, Max Weber, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. If a religion and social change essay comes up in your examination, and it often does, you'll need to show a detailed understanding of Weber and also be able to offer some criticism and analysis too. This podcast will help you to achieve both of those objectives. By using Weber as an illustrative example, you can show how religion can have the potential to create social change. Don't forget, when you write about social change, especially in your introductions, you need to differentiate between progressive and retrogressive change. So progressive, or going forward, is synonymous with Weber, and retrogressive, or going backwards, becoming more basic, godly, simplistic, or in many cases unequal, is synonymous with fundamentalism in all its forms. Anyway, let's have a look at Weber. Much of Weber's writings were in response to the work of Karl Marx. For Weber, Marx could be criticised because his ideas were based on a deterministic belief that all could be explained by making reference to the substructure or economic relations of capitalist society. So if Marx wanted to explain something, he would point to class relationships, because further analysis was already a foregone conclusion. Methodologically, Weber sought to do the opposite. By finding something that happened, in this case capitalism in the West, he sought to go back in history in order to determine why it occurred. So for Weber, this approach was better science, more rigorous and more rational. So maybe Weber was out to prove a point, and he was really having a conversation with someone who was already dead, namely Marx. Weber argued that Protestant forms of Christianity, like Methodists, Baptists, Pietists and Calvinists, who existed toward the end of the 17th century, had a certain ethical characteristic associated with Puritanism. Puritanism was all about leading the aesthetic life of self-denial, thrift and hard work. Furthermore, their belief was based on something called predestination. This means that God had already determined who was the saved, or elect, and who was not saved, the damned. You assumed that you were part of the elect, and you proved your perfect faith by working hard, avoiding gluttony on rich food, wine, and pleasures of the flesh. You led an aesthetic, pure life, and this symbolized your faith in God and his wise decision about your destiny. However, predestination caused something called salvation anxiety. And I remember seeing an example of this in one of those period dramas on the TV many years ago. I remember seeing a female writing in her diary about how fortunate her family had been in business, and how she thought this was surely a sign of God's pleasure, and that she, or they, were part of the elect. So this is an important point for your exam, because it means that economic prosperity was viewed as a sign directly from God that one was part of the elect. The result of all this was to foster what we call the Protestant work ethic. Work, invest, self-denial, prosper and reinvest, grow wealthy and be sure of your chosen status as part of the elect. Even those who were not wealthy might be part of the elect, and by working hard in their vocation or calling, you are adding to God's glory. So for Weber, Protestant Calvinism helped to provide the spark or drive that led to a particular form of rational capitalism in the West. If it aided the formation of capitalism, as Weber argues, then this is a form of progressive social change and something highly relevant to your topic area. Weber then goes on to explain that there were similar characteristics or features in both the East and the West. These might include double-entry bookkeeping, raw materials, labour, a legal system for enforcing contracts, and a banking system to facilitate exchange. In fact, Weber says that these characteristics were better suited towards the development of capitalism in places like India or China than they were in places like Germany. But surprisingly, no such development occurred. If one examined the dominant religions in countries like China and India, like Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism or Hinduism, none of them place much importance on hard work or growing rich. In fact, one might argue the opposite. Meditation, prayer, and the embracing of poverty are seen as more desirable traits. For Weber, these religions failed to provide the passion for work where regular labour was an end in itself. Weber doesn't deny that forms of capitalism were present elsewhere in the world before the type he describes, but for him it wasn't the same. For example, a merchant might do business by taking advantage of people. He might grow rich quickly, but once he had the wealth, he would seek repose or rest. He wouldn't have the need or desire to work continuously or regularly. He would be a pleasure seeker, wasting money, squandering it. Money was only necessary to buy rest and enjoyment, something very different to the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism Weber describes. But under the particular ethic Weber describes, Protestant Calvinism helps propel the development of a uniquely successful form of capitalism in the West. The Puritan would grow rich and never cease to stop working and investing, all for the glory of God and to demonstrate the perfection of his religious faith. The subtle point is that there wasn't a mechanical process going on where religions simply created capitalism. More that a particular form of religious ethic helped in the creation of a particular type of rational, organised capitalism in the West, where maximum profit was the objective. The Protestant work ethic helped to foster the spirit of capitalism, and this can be viewed as a form of progressive social change. So religion shapes our attitudes, this affects our behaviour, and this in turn shapes our economic development. Now we can look at some of the criticisms directed at Weber. Sombart, 1907, argues that Calvinists were not money orientated and saw such acquisitiveness as greedy. However, this is perhaps unfair to Weber because he never referred to the teachings of Calvin himself, who was writing some 150 years earlier. He was referring to certain Calvinist circles that existed towards the end of the 17th century. Predestination may not have intentionally caused us to become obsessed with becoming wealthy, but it had that effect none the same. Salvation anxiety makes us look for signs of God's pleasure, and growing rich was viewed as a positive sign. Others say that there were many Calvinist communities in Scotland, Switzerland, Hungary and the Netherlands where capitalism did not occur. But Gordon Marshall says that this is perhaps another unfair criticism of Weber, because he isn't claiming that the only thing responsible for the development of capitalism is Protestant religion. Now we can look at Marxism. The Marxist Kautsky 1953, offers a more significant critique in that he says Weber had his history muddled up. For Kautsky, Protestant Calvinism developed after capitalism, not the other way around. This is often referred to as the chicken and egg argument. What Marxists are getting at is that Jesus wasn't a great fan of rich people and he embraced a life of poverty. The quote from the Bible that says it's easier for a camel to jump through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God is a good illustrative example. So perhaps Protestant Calvinism is simply a religion of the rich, as it takes away their guilt for being so rich whilst others are so poor. If being rich is a sign of God's pleasure, it seems a very convenient religion for the rich. So Protestant Calvinism becomes an apologia, or defence for the bourgeoisie. In short, there hasn't been a lot of agreement about how valid Weber's thesis is. That shouldn't worry us as students of sociology. As long as you can offer an accurate account of the main aspects of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism as it relates to social change, along with some criticisms, that's the main thing. Gordon Marshall wrote an article on Weber's Protestant ethic in Sociology Review, September 1991. A bit long, but it's also worth having a look at.